While all unmanned aircraft systems below 55 pounds are defined as small UAS or SUAS by the FAA, we will also add another term, micro UAS, for those that are below 0.55 pounds, such as the one to the left. The middle UAS is an entry-level SUAS, and the one on the right is a large UAS. Micro UAS are the most prevalent, typically purchased at retail locations. They present little threat to aviation or people, and the FAA has determined they will not regulate them. Here we see a micro UAS in the upper left corner. Next, we see the most common commercial use of an SUAS in the center. These weigh between 0.55 pounds and 55 pounds and can perform a variety of tasks. Last, we see a large UAS in the top right. Each of these have very different roles and different regulatory requirements. There are several ways to operate legally as a remote pilot, as provided in Part 107 of Title 49 of the Code of Federal Regulations. No person may manipulate the flight controls of a small unmanned aircraft system unless that person has a remote pilot certificate or that person is under the direct supervision of a remote pilot. The remote pilot in command must possess a certificate or have been granted permission by the FAA to operate as a foreign registered aircraft. If you fly for a hobby, strictly for recreational purposes only, and you follow a set of community-based standards, you're subject to the FAA operations under 14 CFR Part 101. Most pilots in this category are members of the Academy of Model Aeronautics. AMA has a robust set of safety rules and training, which are similar to the rules in Part 107. For each of these operations, you must ask yourself, does this flight meet the requirements of 14 CFR Part 107 or Part 101? That's the first step to ensure you're following the correct rule set. As a hobbyist or for recreation, you can fly under Part 101 only if the aircraft is flown strictly for hobby or recreational use. The aircraft is operated in accordance with a community-based set of safety guidelines and within the programming of a nationwide community-based organization, which means you're affiliated with the local organization and you're flying under its rules. The aircraft must also be limited to not more than 55 pounds in weight. You must always operate the aircraft in a manner that it does not interfere with and it always gives way to a manned aircraft. As a hobbyist, when flown within 5 miles of an airport, the operator notifies the airport and air traffic control that's required. The FAA governs, by statute, how public entities are regulated as well. When properly certified, public agencies, including federal, state, and local governments, are issued a certificate of authorization, granting special rules for their operations, including pilot and aircraft requirements and certification. So as an example, if you work at a university or for a police department, it is likely that you can operate as a public aircraft. The statute further states that PAOs are limited by the statute to certain government operations within the United States airspace. Although these operations must continue to comply with certain general operating rules, including those applicable to all aircraft in the National Airspace System, referred to as the NAS, other civil certification and oversight regulations do not apply to these public operations. Most aspects of those are not subject to FAA oversight. However, often a public agency chooses to operate under Part 107 because it's advantageous. The last remaining authority that has been issued is what's referred to as a Section 333 of the original Act. This exemption was issued to industrial operators prior to Part 107 becoming administrative law, but it still remains valid. Over time, most of these commercial exemptions will be converted to Part 107, except when they operate a UAS over 55 pounds and require aircraft certification. But even those large aircraft operations will likely be included in future amendments of Part 107. It is likely that operating under Part 107 is the most advantageous to most operators. These may include various types of aircraft in any type of airspace that the Secretary of Transportation chooses. You're also required to register and prominently display your registration number on the UAS. Recent court decisions have exempted those operating only as hobbyist or recreational pilots. However, there are several bills adding this requirement to register to hobbyist and recreational pilots. At the same time, several bills are working their way through Congress which will reinforce and re-add and introduce this requirement again. So it's important that you stay on top of current events. While there are no known fines for non-registration, the FAA has not ruled out the possibility of fines, and it is incumbent upon the operator to register when required. So after reviewing the regulations, do you think that you need a certificate? And if so, what must you do to receive your certificate? A 107 pilot must pass a written exam. At the end of this course, you will be able to answer questions in each of the subject areas and understand their applicable parts for a UAS pilot. The Part 107 test will include up to 25% on regulations, up to 25% of the questions on airspace, up to 16% of the questions on weather, and up to 11% of the questions on loading and performance, including center of gravity calculations. The assignments in your course will prepare you for each of these testing areas. For Part 107 certification eligibility, you must be at least 16 years old, be able to speak, read, write, and understand the English language, be in a physical and a mental condition that would not interfere with the safe operation of a small UAS. You must pass an initial aeronautical test at an FAA-approved knowledge testing center, or if you're a manned aircraft pilot, you may pass an online course if you have a certification under Part 61. You must obtain your unmanned aircraft operator certificate with a small UAS rating after passing the exam, typically within 2 weeks, from the FAA. This is just like an existing pilot certificate, and it never expires. You must also pass a recurrent aeronautical knowledge exam every 24 months. Prior to operations, after certified, you must also conduct a pre-flight inspection to include specific aircraft and control station system checks to ensure that the small UAS is safe for operation. You must always make available to the FAA or any law enforcement officer upon request your small UAS for inspection, all documents, your certificate, and any records. Anytime that you have an accident, you must report it within 10 days to the FAA if it results in a serious injury or more than $500 of property damage. As a remote pilot also, you have the following responsibility. You can only fly unmanned aircraft that weigh less than 55 pounds unless you have a waiver. You must always maintain a visual line of sight with your UAS without the aid of any other type of binoculars or other tool. The remote pilot in command must use visual observers if they cannot meet this themselves individually, but it's not required. You can operate only one UAS at a time. There's no swarming like we saw at the Super Bowl without some extensive waivers and training. You can only operate during daylight. That means the time between official sunrise and official sunset, and twilight operations, which occur 30 minutes before sunrise and 30 minutes after sunset if you have a working anti-collision light system. You must always yield the right-of-way to other aircraft, whether manned or unmanned. A first-person view camera, which allows a pilot to see what the UAS camera sees on a small screen or a tablet, are parts of many systems. You cannot use that first-person camera solely to meet see and avoid requirements. You must have a visual observer or another method in addition to the camera to see and avoid other aircraft. You may not operate directly above people unless they are part of the operation. A UAS cannot operate from a moving aircraft or from a moving land or waterborne vehicle except when flown over sparsely populated areas and you are not carrying another person's property for compensation or hire. These are the very basic rules for UAS, and we will discuss them all in much more depth during the course. You must be very familiar with the methods needed to comply with these rules. They require different skills, which you will learn and practice in the course, such as how to read aeronautical charts and publications, interpret weather and airspace requirements, and follow safe operation guidelines. Other rules that you should know. You cannot exceed 100 miles per hour or an altitude of 400 feet above the ground. You can never fly with a visibility of less than 3 miles from your control station or operate in Class A airspace, which is above 18,000 feet. Operating in Class B, C, D, and E airspace, except with the permission of air traffic control, is prohibited. You can never operate your UAS carelessly or recklessly. What you can do is operate in Class G airspace without ATC permission. These are some of the differences in flying requirements depending on the type of authority that you're using for your flight. As you read in the text, airspace is a first consideration when determining how to comply. Recreational pilots flying under Part 101 within 5 miles of an airport have to notify the airport and any ATC facility, such as the control tower. Commercial pilots in B, C, D, or E surface areas have to get permission from the tower in advance through a waiver process. Currently, the FAA is not mandating that commercial SUAS pilots notify airports since they will be in communication in advance with air traffic control. Also, note there is no requirement for notification in Class G. The FAA puts the burden on SUAS certificated pilots to see and avoid other aircraft. Here's an example of Class C airspace around Northwest Arkansas. You will notice the center of the large magenta circle is Northwest Arkansas Regional Airport. You can see the top of the airspace is 5,300 mean sea level and the floor is 2,500 mean sea level. The dashed magenta line in the Class E surface area is Bentonville Municipal Airport, and the dashed blue circles surround airports with Class D airspace and operating control towers, such as Rogers Municipal, Springdale Municipal, and Fayetteville Drake Field. Flying during certain events can be expensive and may even result in your arrest. Temporary flight restrictions, referred to as TFRs, include football games, the airspace over the president, wildfires and other natural disasters, and areas restricted for national security. If you don't know the rules, you could fly right over a Division I football game and into the arms of the FAA and law enforcement. This is not a game. It's important you understand the consequences. If you fly over an NCAA Division I football game or an NFL game or a NASCAR motor speedway or a Major League Baseball event, any event with a seating capacity of 30,000 or more anywhere in the United States, and you do not have FAA permission, you will likely be prosecuted. You must check the current notices to airmen, referred to as NOTAMs, using official references in the documents section of this course to ensure you do not fly into a TFR or a temporary flight restriction. To fly legally near those events, you must obtain several approvals. You must comply with all normal 107 or community-based rules. You must have approval of the event sponsor. You must possess a 107 certificate, a certificate of authorization, or a 333 exemption. You cannot deviate from any 107 requirements or those listed in your certificate of authorization or your 333. In addition, you must have any other waivers required to fly in Class B, C, D, or E airspace. There are consequences for non-compliance. For example, FAA fines are a possibility, such as interfering with emergency operations. That's $32,140 per violation and often results in several occurrences per violation. Temporary flight restriction violations can result in up to 1 year in federal prison and a $100,000 fine, and most assuredly would result in the suspension or revocation of your certificate. I hope this has helped you to begin to understand some of the information required to operate your UAS. Through the course, we will continue to emphasize UAS safety, your journey to become an airman, your responsibility in this new adventure, and the many UAS benefits you will enjoy as a certificated remote pilot. I am looking forward to taking the journey with you.